Good morning and welcome to the Water Bootcamp brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. We hope you enjoyed the Fresno State Jazz Band while we got started. In celebration of Water Awareness Month, CWI is hosting 3 water bootcamps in English and 1 in Spanish this month. Today, we will cover what is CWI, hydrology, watershed, climate change, and stormwater. You can submit questions as we go on the YouTube chat feature. There is a slight delay between the presentation, so please ask your questions as they come to mind so we make sure the speakers are able to get them on time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session's speaker is CWI's Director Laura Ramos. Director Ramos has been working on water issues in California at Fresno State for over 23 years. And now to talk about CWI and its incentives, it is my pleasure to welcome Director Ramos to the virtual stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Victoria, for that introduction. And like she said, I will be speaking about the California Water Institute and its initiatives. Let's get started. Since you will be with us for a few days, I wanted to make sure if you're going to join us for the entire sessions that we told you a little bit about what the California Water Institute is, what we do at Fresno State, and what we've been doing for the last 25 years before we dive into some of the water information. The California Water Institute is one of 4 sister organizations at Fresno State that all have something to do related to water. We have the California Water Institute, the Center for Irrigation Technology, the Water Energy and Technology Center, or WET Center, and CSU Water. The Center for Irrigation Technology has been at Fresno State since 1980 and is recognized leader in third-party testing. They have a hydraulics lab and some sprinklers lab where they test some of the equipment. They also do field research in the Fresno State Farm on some of the research plots that are near those buildings. They also do a lot of analytical studies and education focused on farmers. You'll see a picture on the right, their hydraulics lab testing that is open to the public for use as well as touring. The Water Energy and Technology Center, also known as the WET Center, has successfully leveraged the Central Valley's extensive resources to support its mission of supporting innovative water, energy, and agriculture technology. But their focus is on entrepreneurs and ventures and helping make their path from commercialization to solving some of the regional water challenges easier and smoother, and they help them and guide them. They do this through some services that they offer, such as the Technology Innovation and Evaluation Service, the Valley Ventures Accelerator. They also have advisory services and different types of memberships that you can join for the WET Center. They've evaluated over 470 technologies, supported a lot of entrepreneurs, and as well as some of over 70 in ventures that they've helped accelerate. They help with job creation in the San Joaquin Valley, and 20% of the ventures, C-suites were filled by women and 49% were filled by minority groups. They also help with patents. So if you have a technology that you would like to launch or would like to see if it is a valuable product so that it can go into the market, please visit the WET Center. And then we also have CSU Water, Water Advocacy Towards Education and Research. CSU Water is a CSU system-wide affinity group that helps and supports all of the different water activities in the 23 CSU system. It is located at Fresno State for administrative purposes, but its focus is the entire CSU system. And now I'll go more into depth about the California Water Institute. I just figured I'd give you a little bit of background about the other institutes that are on campus that we work with and partner on different projects. The California Water Institute is a bridge between the California um, water issues to your right that focus on all of the different aspects of water users, whether it's environment, agriculture, disadvantaged communities that are dependent on domestic wells, whether it's a community, urban, and whether the water issues are the quantity of water, quality of water, groundwater recharge, all of the different aspects of water that affect our communities in California. We work with those to try to find out what are some of their specific challenges that Fresno State faculty, staff, and students can find sustainable solutions by doing research and education, and we make sure that all of those are interdisciplinary. We also have a Fresno State farm that works just like a commercial farm that can be used to test different products, but also it can be used to apply some of the solutions that we work on to make sure that they are viable solutions. We do this with a group of staff and students. So I'm Laura Ramos, the director of the Institute, and we forgot to update the slide because I just recently became the director. I have two assistant directors. One is Tom Holyoke and then Cordy Qualley, which you'll hear from later on in one of the sessions. Tom Holyoke is a political science faculty on campus, and Cordy Qualley was recently a civil engineering faculty. And now they, for part of their assignment, they work with the California Water Institute. We also have three staff members, Jace Treveo, Julissa Zavala, and Kaylee Rogers, and more recently added to the team, Kathy Barnett. And then we also make sure that we give students the experience that they need when they go to the real world. And for that, we bring in these students to work on specific projects and that target their area of study. So we have Emily Bryant, who helps us with all of our legislative affairs, Phoebe Bloomfield, who is a research assistant specializing in GIS. Isabella Ramirez works on marketing, and you might have seen some of her things on social media. Victoria Vera is a marketing student who you heard from earlier, and she works on our publications and eBlast. So you might have seen some of her work as well. And then we also have Dune, who helps us with all of our accounting, and Sarith Hawk, who is a journalist graduate student that helps us with some of the storytelling and writing of those stories. We have a lot of different projects that we're currently working on that I've separated into different categories. So I'll first start with some of the collaborations and stakeholder engagement that we are involved in. The first one is the California Partnership for the San Joaquin Valley, and specifically their water work group. We started working and facilitating this group in 2020. And what it is a group of county staff that works on specific challenges that affect all of the 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley. At that time in 2020, when we began, one of the issues was that during one of the frequent, recent droughts, was that there was a lot of people whose wells were going dry and they weren't sure where to get help or that there was even help for them. And so we created this campaign that, has your well gone dry? We created a website, we created different marketing assets, and then working with the State Water Resources Control Board, we had all of these material translated into 9 different languages. And so the idea was, let's make it simple for those dependent on groundwater for their domestic water use, a simple way of getting help if their water once goes dry or if you know of somebody. After that, we've worked on 2 other different projects. One was Recharge California to encourage recharge, but also give some education on if you do want to do recharge, what types of recharge is there? Where do I go to get help? What are some of the concerns? And can I even help with helping with recharge? And following, we've done other different projects, and we continue to help with any water issues that specifically affect the counties and county staff. The other collaboration that we work on or that we work with is the San Joaquin Valley Water Collaborative Action Program. The CAP seeks to create a shared vision for water management in the San Joaquin Valley, and they engage multiple stakeholders and special interest groups throughout the region. The CAP uses us to contract and provide some of the services that are needed to facilitate some of the conversations, but we also bring our expertise and those of our faculty and some of the research that we're doing to provide some of the information and background to some of the challenges that they are working to create one shared vision for what those challenges are. A very similar project or collaboration related to it is the Water Blueprint for the San Joaquin Valley. The blueprint is a coalition of water users, water districts, farmers, commodity groups, and municipalities that all engage government, community-based organizations, and academia to bring common sense solutions to some of our water issues in the state. The Water Blueprint focus is to bring one united voice and be a champion for water resources policy and projects that maximize accessibility and affordability of water in the San Joaquin Valley. So those are some of the projects and collaborations that we work with and make sure that we know we bring our information that we're working on to them, as well as share what their vision is for water in the San Joaquin Valley to the public. Some of the other projects that we're working on are more regional planning in nature. One of them is a unified water plan. And the Unified Water Plan is a partnership between the Blueprint as well as us, and it's considering all of the range of ongoing and sometimes disconnected work, not on purpose, but just because each of the agencies tend to work on their geographical boundaries and what are their concerns and what are their requirements and what do they need to work on. And so because they're focused on that geographical area, at times they're not able to see what their neighbors are working on or plan with their neighbors. And so with this plan, we hope to bring all of those different plans and together into one and a very high level and see if there's any comprehensive regional solutions that can be recommended, because we're now seeing at a higher level what some of those disconnects are and how we can make some recommendations. The focus of the report is not to evaluate or review individual projects that are being proposed, but rather coordinate and integrate them into one valley region, and one that enables and is consistent with local projects, but that is a higher level plan for the entire San Joaquin Valley. Very similar to it, but more of an implementation is our most recent climate resilience project that is focused on regional water recharge in the San Joaquin Valley. This is a 30-month project spearheaded by the California Water Institute, and its focus is to develop a comprehensive regional water management plan. This aims to address groundwater recharge and flood management issues in the San Joaquin Valley. Some of the objectives are to increase groundwater levels, and we're going to do this through flood mitigation. But also we want to do a lot of community education and landowner awareness. So both of these are focused on educating those that will either implement groundwater recharge and or will be affected by groundwater recharge. We want to make sure that those communities that will wake up one day and see a groundwater recharge basin near their home know what it is, what's its purpose, what are some of the potential benefits, and what are some of the potential concerns that they should be aware of, and how to monitor for those concerns. We have 4 key partners to make this happen, which are Self-Help Enterprise, North Kings GSA, the Madera County GSA, as well as the Mid-Cahuilla GSA. In addition to regional planning, we also have a couple of studies that we're specifically working on. One of them is we're doing some cover crop studies in partnership with the Center for Irrigation Technology and the Fresno State University Agricultural Lab, which is our farm. We have um, it's a 2-year experiment where we're putting some cover crops with different water constraints in one of the Center for Irrigation Technology research plots, and we hope to share that information with the public on what are the crops and what are the how did those crops react to the different water constraints. In addition, we're doing we're looking at how can we improve water quality and soil health outcomes of farm recharge in California, specifically in pistachio orchards. We are partnering with Sustainable Conservation on this project, and we hope to have some pilot studies where we will use flood-mar or flooding some of those fields when they are dormant and learn a lot about what happens to the water quality underneath those fields, what happens to the soil, and what happens to the crop. Some of our key past grants and contracts are we created a governance research report that showcased all of the different governance structure that were implemented because of Sigma, and that's available on our website. We also did some studies of meters and well monitoring pilot programs for the Cahuilla Subbasin. We developed a San Joaquin Valley Water Infrastructure Investment Program. We also did a City of Fresno Small Water System Regional Consolidation Study, and then a few other studies that we have done that we're very proud of, and you can find all of those reports and studies on our website. We also, in addition to doing projects, stakeholder engagement, and others, we also do a lot of education to the public. Education comes in different forms. Some of it comes with specific students at Fresno State, and specifically, we launched the first interdisciplinary water minor. And what that means is that each of the and traditionally, most of the minors at the university were very focused on one college. So either the School of Engineering, the School of Ag, the School of Social Science had all of the classes for that specific minor. This one is a first interdisciplinary, which means it has a class from all of the different colleges because we want our students that graduate with this minor to be well-rounded and understand all of the different aspects that affect water management in California. Our students will be able to understand the importance of water to everyday life, the economy, and specifically in California and the San Joaquin Valley. They'll understand what some of the constraints and conflicts that have come with the different water users. We want them to find solutions, but in order to move forward and find solutions, sometimes you need to look back and see what caused some of those problems. They'll be able to analyze and explain some of these problems and how they benefit from new policies. And then we'll also have a lot of guest speakers from the general public. A lot of us end up in water. We don't pick water as a career. We want these students to pick water as their career. And in order to do so, we need to help them to understand and learn what all of those different careers are related to water. They will also learn what some of the water management challenges are that are impacting our water supply these days, including our population growth and climate change. In addition to some of that education to the students, CWI hosts a lot of community education. We do a lot of events such as this one. We do virtual and in-person events. We also have a weekly water insight, which is a partnership with KMJ. And so on Wednesday mornings, you will hear a 3 to 5 minute segment that I do on something related to water, whether it's water rights, what does the snowpack reading mean, how does water get allocated from the State Water Project, among other different ideas. And then we also have a blog on LinkedIn that specifically talks about some of the collaboration successes and how different water users can collaborate for a common benefit. In addition to that, we have a quarterly newsletter that goes out that talks about all of the different projects that we're working on and makes you apprised of all of the upcoming events and education opportunities that all of the public can take advantage of. Miss Victoria, that is my presentation.
At this time, we will be addressing questions submitted via chat. It is not too late to submit your questions. Please add them to the chat function in YouTube. That was all the questions in the chat. If you have any additional questions that we did not address, please email us. Thank you for joining us for this session. We hope it was informative. This session was recorded and will be available on YouTube until June 15th. Before we take a break, I would like to invite you to join the CWI listserv by following the link on the QR code to be the first to learn about CWI's projects. We will now transition to a short break.
just brief pause as we switch bands and we'll get these started again. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to the Water Bootcamp brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. We hope you enjoyed the Fresno State band while we got started. My name is Victoria Vera. I am a junior at Fresno State studying business, and I will be the moderator for these sessions. As I mentioned earlier, these virtual education sessions are brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. CWI is celebrating 25 years of working to integrate and coordinate Fresno State's interdisciplinary research and education of water-related programs. We do this in collaboration with water stakeholders to facilitate the development and communication of research-based solutions to water challenges in California. The mission of CWI is to connect academia to the water community to solve water management challenges through education and research. To achieve this, we engage faculty and students in developing interdisciplinary research-based solutions to water challenges for a sustainable water future. In celebration of Water Awareness Month, CWI is hosting 3 water boot camps in English and 1 in Spanish this month. Earlier today, we covered what CWI is and some of its incentives. And now we are moving to hydrology, and we'll follow with watersheds and stormwater. You can submit questions as we go on the YouTube chat feature. There is a slight delay between the presentation, so please ask your questions as they come to mind, so we make sure the speakers are able to get them on time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session speaker is CWI's Director Laura Ramos. Director Ramos has been working on water issues in California at Fresno State for over 23 years. And now to talk about hydrology, it is my pleasure to welcome Director Ramos to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Victoria, for that introduction. So as Victoria mentioned, I will be talking about hydrology in this session, and we'll start with just what is hydrology, moving on to some of the different types of water, including vapor, surface water, groundwater, and what is imported water. We'll start with hydrology. Just hydrology in general, this is just a basic definition. It is the scientific study of the movement and distribution and management of water on Earth, which includes the water cycle, water resources, and environmental watershed sustainability. So it's any of the movement that we do as humans by building canals, reservoirs, and how we distribute that water, but also how just nature has done it for many years and how it moves its water, starting from the headwaters all the way to the bottom of its watershed. And so we'll start first with just the water cycle. If you remember this from just your elementary school classes, it is a circle that covers all of the different aspects of water. And it covers where water is and where it's going. So as we know, it is a circle, so there isn't a start and an end. But for purposes of this presentation, we'll say that water starts in the mountains. It consolidates there through evaporation, and then once the clouds are ready and they're full, they fall either in the form of snow or in the form of rain. And once those waters fall, they either start at the very top of a watershed, which is the very highest point of an area, and then it will either sit there in the form of snow and melt slowly, or it will come down through its rivers, ditches, and make its way down into our rivers, into our reservoirs, where it will collect. And then from there, we move it through canals and aqueducts and ditches to where we need it. We distribute that water. And then it ends up in our communities, coming to our homes, to our parks, or to some of the farms. And once it's there, and as well as recharge basins, once it's there and it is exposed to the environment, then some of that water will evaporate and will go up into the clouds, and the cycle starts all over again. So just specifically to California hydrology, giving you a little bit of an overview. California has water that its water sources are from many different types. Four key ones are the snowpack. As I mentioned earlier, some of that water from the rain or from the snow comes in the form of snow and it collects in our mountains. So the snowpack is a big water source for California. Our rivers, and then our groundwater, and as well as we use some of the imported water that is part of our water sources. And because it comes from all of these different areas and all of them have different rules and regulations, as well as who can use that water and how you can use it and where you can use it, it is a very complex management system. And it has been especially made more complex due to the climate variability. We built some of our infrastructure to fit the climate of 50 years ago, but now that climate is constantly changing. And so our systems are not able to adapt as quickly as climate variability has done. But also all of this hydrology and all of this precipitation is just vital for agriculture, for our urban centers, as well as our ecosystems. So focusing a little bit more on surface water. Surface water comes in the form of vapors or humidity that condense in the ground or in our vegetation. And so some of the times during the winter, my apologies, and I had to clear my throat a little bit. So at times during the winter, you will wake up in the morning and you might see some condensation on your grass that builds up overnight and on the vegetation. So even though it's not a lot of water, it's still water that our vegetation can use and take into use as it needs it. And then we also have precipitation that comes in the form of snow as well as rain. Some of that water is moved both by nature as well as by humans. And so it starts and collects in the headwaters of a watershed. Which we will explain in a little bit more in depth in the watershed presentation. And then it moves also because the snow starts melting and some of its rain is running off. So those are the natural ways water gets moved, and it moves into our streams, our rivers, and our tributaries. From there, it goes into our lakes and reservoirs. From there, it's distributed to farms and cities via either man-made canals, but we also use our rivers as some of our natural conveyance systems. We have, there are some major rivers that are part of our system for conveying some of that water and for access to some of that water for all of California. So the biggest one is the Sacramento and the San Joaquin rivers, which are crucial to the Central Valley agriculture, as well as a lot of its communities. And it's a major source of water just for all of California. But also, it's not the only one. We also have the Colorado River, which which provides water to 6 different states. But we in California have a big allocation from that river. But there's an increase in demand from the other states for that water. And just as there becomes less water available in that river, then there also becomes more of an impact on the other rivers and dependency on those rivers. And then we also have the Klamath River, which has been trying to balance agriculture needs with salmon habitat. And just a little bit more of information on specific to the Sacramento River and its dramatic size is that it flows an average of 22 million acre feet annually. And so just so you can potentially picture how much water that is, 1 acre feet of water is like 1 football field with a height of 1 feet of water and just full of it. So the Sacramento River flows 22 million of water similar to that. And so in addition to surface water being a big portion of our California hydrology, another one is groundwater. And so groundwater is something that we can't really see, but it is underneath our ground. And the water has been there for centuries, some of it more recent, but some of it has been there for centuries and collected in different aquifers as well as groundwater basins. Think of it as very many bathtubs underneath their ground. Some of them are connected, some of them are disconnected, and they do not know physical geographical boundaries. And so just like we know where one county or one city starts, our groundwater aquifers do not recognize or know that. And some of the water is moving. Some of it is just like a underground river. The only difference is that water flows very, very slow. And so some of the challenges that come with that is that we've been pumping some of that water, and we're not really able to see how much water we've been pumping or how low our water is going until some of our wells are going dry because they can no longer access that water at that depth, or subsidence, which we'll learn at later subsequent trainings. So some of the resources are just information about groundwater, which, like I mentioned, we will go more into depth later on in the month session. There has been an over-reliance on groundwater during the drought years that have led to its depletion. So what happens is we use our surface water. When there is no snow that is melting slowly, when there is rain, we capture that water and we move it slowly where it's needed, and we farm or use it. We treat it for our communities and use it as it's needed, or put it for recharge. When there isn't enough surface water, we tend to rely on groundwater. But over the years, we've had to rely more and more on that groundwater, which has caused a lot of depletion of that. And so to fix some of those issues or slow down some of those constraints, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed in 2014, and it aims for our groundwater to be sustainable by the year 2040. Um, in the past, the Central Valley groundwater has overdraft even up to 2 million acre feet per year. So we need to slow that down, and because it's caused some damage, including land subsidence, which happen because of groundwater pumping. Fresno State Library created this map. As I mentioned earlier, we can't really see how much water we're using out of the groundwater. When you go and drive by a lake, you're able to see the bathtub rings that kind of show you where the water once was and where it is now. That is really hard to see with our groundwater. And so the Fresno State Library, their GIS experts created this map, that we will share a link to this map so that you're able to zoom in and zoom out and move it around so that you can see some of the areas. You can see it as if it was a lake and see where some of those bathtub rings are. But this is not something that we all can see and make sure that what we do every day affects some of this groundwater depletion. Sorry about that. Thank you, Victoria, for getting us back to the right slide. We also hear a lot about imported water. And so it's not imported as we import products from other countries, but it's imported water that comes into a very specific hydrologic region from another hydrologic region. So as I mentioned earlier, we use our rivers and aqueduct to move water all over California. And when that water wasn't originated in that watershed, and it's being transferred or moved to another watershed or another hydrologic region, that is what we consider imported water. So imported water um, can be as simple as from one city to another because it didn't originate in that city. It can be as large as from Southern California to Northern California. So imported water, anything that does not originate in that same hydrologic region or basin, and it is being drained from another one, and it's being transferred or moved via aqueducts, canals, or pipelines. And the how and what the water is that can be moved also depends on the purpose of that water. Most of the water in California has a specific requirement on where it can be used and what it can be used for. So we can't just transfer water without really looking at what is the purpose of that water, what was it and its initial intention of that water, and when we move it, will it continue that intention? And then some of that water cannot be moved out of that area. So there's a lot of constraints that come with moving that water, but it can be done, especially if we have the infrastructure. Some of the times infrastructure is what slows us down or hinders us from moving that water. We all agree on moving that water, but there isn't the infrastructure. And so we have to make sure that as we work on imported waters, that there is that infrastructure. And sometimes we also need to treat that water, especially if it's going to human consumption. Depending on the different types of water, it might be more saline than others because it's coming from a different hydrologic region. And because we don't know where it was, because it's different than what the water that originates in that hydrologic region, it might need to be treated before it's distributed. And that is all I have for hydrology, Victoria.
At this time, we'll be addressing questions submitted via chat. It is not too late to submit your questions. Please add them to the chat function in YouTube. Okay, question 1. How does flooding affect water supplies?
Water supply is based on what we've traditionally have known and how we use that water to supply the needs of farms as different communities. Flooding is like drinking gulps from a cup. Sometimes, if you take little sips from a cup, your body's able to process it. Your body's able to figure out, does it need more? Enjoy the flavor of the water or enjoy the need of that water. But there's times when you have to chug that water. And so your body's no longer able to hold it. So the same thing happens to our nature. We want to use that water, but we have limitations on where to put that water. If we're a city that is treating that water, the treatment plant can only pull in a certain amount of water a day. Our canals can only hold so much water a day. And so it is a great water source and supply of water if you are ready and know where to put it and have a place to prevent any damage. And so as we're seeing more and more floods throughout the years because of climate change, we're having to prepare a lot more for things that sometimes only happen every 5 or 7 years. But there is so much water that can cause damage to communities, to businesses, and we have to be ready to have where to put it so that during the years where there is less of a supply, we can use it then. And so if you joined us earlier, we talked about a groundwater recharge study that Fresno State is doing, which focuses on both the flood as well as the recharge. So how can we strategically move some of that flood water supply to use it during the years where we can't use it and put it into our savings account?
That was all the questions in the chat. If you have additional questions that we did not address, please email us. Thank you for joining us for this session. We hope it was informative. This session was recorded and will be available on YouTube until June 15th. Before we take a break, I would like to invite you to join the CWI listserv by following the link on the QR code to be the first to learn about CWI's projects. We will now transition to a short break. Good morning and welcome to the Water Bootcamp brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. We hope you enjoyed the Fresno State Jazz Band while we got started. My name is Victoria Vera. I am a junior at Fresno State studying business, and I will be the moderator for these sessions. As I mentioned earlier, these virtual education sessions are brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. CWI is celebrating 25 years of working to integrate and coordinate Fresno State's interdisciplinary research and education of water-related programs. We do this in collaboration with water stakeholders to facilitate the development and communication of research-based solutions to water challenges in California. The mission of CWI is to connect academia to the water community to solve water management challenges through education and research. To achieve this, we engage faculty and students in developing interdisciplinary research-based solutions to water challenges for a sustainable water future. In celebration of Water Awareness Month, CWI is hosting 3 water boot camps in English and 1 in Spanish this month. Earlier today, we covered what CWI is and some of its initiatives and hydrology. Now we are moving to watersheds and will follow with stormwater. You can submit questions as we go on the YouTube chat feature. There is a slight delay between the presentations, so please ask your questions as they come to mind so we make sure the speakers are able to get them on time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session's speaker is CWI's Director Laura Ramos. Director Ramos has been working on water issues in California at Fresno State for over 23 years. And now to talk about watersheds, it is my pleasure to welcome Director Ramos to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Victoria, and welcome everybody. Good morning. As Victoria said, as Victoria gets us back to our screen, I will speak about watersheds during this session. And so we'll start with what is a watershed. You might have heard us say it in a couple of presentations earlier this morning, but it'll also be a topic that you hear in additional presentations. So we want to give you a background of what is a watershed, and then we're going to go into specifics on 3 key watersheds for California, which include the Sacramento, the San Joaquin, as well as the Colorado watershed. So what is a watershed? Let's start with a watershed is a land area that drains off or from snow melt and rain into connected systems of lakes, streams, rivers, and other waterways. It is typically defined by the largest draining water course within that system. It has natural functions. The first one being it collects water from precipitation, it stores it in groundwater and aquifer, or it releases water as runoff. But it also provides habitat for plants and animals. And they can be of any size. They can be as tiny as a pond in a park and as big as the Sacramento River. So it is a general area where water runs off to. And so just a picture of what that is as you can see, this watershed would start at the headwaters, which is the very highest and top part of where water first hits or snow first hits. And then it starts melting and or running off as rain would into all of its rivers and rivers and streams. It goes into aqueducts, and then so this would be the general larger area of a watershed. If you see on the graphic towards the bottom center-ish, there is a little pond that has maybe some dirt mounds in an area, and so water is going to hit there first because it's taller than the little pond, and then it's going to make its own crevices and make its way down into creating this pond. So that is how small a watershed can be and how large a watershed can be. And so if you would like to know where your watershed is, just look at where water is running off to and follow it to the very beginning and say, oh, the water starts here and then it runs off here. And that is your watershed. And you can be part of many watersheds depending on their sizes. So in this graphic, we show you that the little pond in the park is a watershed, but that in itself is part of the larger watershed of the entire graphic. And so you could be in a small and medium as well as in a large watershed. Oh, sorry about that. So how do you find your watershed? I went ahead of myself. You identify the stream that's located the closest to you and you trace it to the very beginning, which would be the waterheads for that watershed. And then where it drains to is your watershed. And so I'm going to go a little bit into some of the California watersheds. We have several in California. Each one's of the different colors in the map on the right is a watershed. But for purposes of this presentation, we're just going to focus on 3 of those watersheds, which are the Sacramento, the San Joaquin, and the Colorado River watersheds. These watersheds all have water that starts at the waterhead, and they all have some that comes from snow as well as rain, and it's connected through all of their lakes and streams and rivers and other waterways, and then it makes its way down into the valleys. And so to get started, I'm going to start with the San Joaquin, the Sacramento River watershed. And so the main river is what we named the watershed after because it's the main conveyance of water in that area. The the Sacramento River watershed, sorry about that, encompasses more than 27,000 square miles in 19 counties. So as I said earlier, it could be as large as it needs to be, but it can also be small. This is one of the bigger watersheds that California has. The river itself, it's more than 400 miles long, and it stretches from the snow-packed Mount Shasta all the way through the Sacramento Valley and to the San Francisco Bay. At its headwaters and rising, it starts with the Klamath Mountain, and then it reaches all the way into the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta, as well as the San Francisco Bay. And then because it is such a big watershed, I'm going to divide it up into the upper river, the valley, as well as the lower river of that watershed. So as I mentioned earlier, it starts in the watersheds near Mount Shasta. And then it has 3 rivers that originate or that it follows from there, which include the Upper Sacramento River, the McCloud River, and the Pitt River. And they all have water that starts in that general area and then moves towards and then all connects in the Sacramento River. From there, the Shasta Lake is formed, and because of Shasta Dam, which was constructed by the Central Valley Project, which you will hear in additional presentations. It flows into some of the smaller, included are some of the smaller reservoirs like Lake Siskiyou. Before turning to the south, the river flows down through canyons and about 60 miles past Danzamere and Costella before emptying into the Shasta Lake and the lakehead in Shasta County. It also includes the Pitt River, which is the largest of the 3, which begins in Montco County in the northeastern corner of California, and then it flows northwest for nearly 300 miles before it empties up into near Shasta Dam. In the lower end of Shasta and of Shasta Dam, and which impounds it is part of the flood control for that area, but it also has irrigation and hydropower generation. So the water is also used for that, or the dam is also used for that. And before the construction of the Shasta Dam, the McCloud River emptied into the Pitt River, which joined the Sacramento near forming mining towns of Kennett, and before it submerged into when it was submerged when Shasta Lake was filled. And so as you can see, there are, because of some of the changes that we've made to the landscape, such as including a dam, some of the traditional ways that water moved into these areas has slightly changed throughout the years. But these are some of the major other rivers that empty out into the lake and then make their way down the Sacramento River from Shasta, that are all part of the upper river of the Sacramento River um, watershed. And then we move into the Sacramento Valley, which still is carrying the same water from that area. And so below Shasta Dam, the river enters the foothills of the northern Sacramento Valley. And as you can see, it's a very vast area that passes from Redding and turns to the southeast to Tehama County. And then it corners some of it, and it hits the boundaries of some of the additional counties all the way until it reaches the Tisdale Weir. From there, it also connects to the Feather River, which is one of its largest tributaries, and it joins in Verona. Oroville Dam, which is on the Feather River, it was constructed by the State Water Project, which is different than the Central Valley Project, which we talked about earlier. But it also goes through the Sutton Pass and the Yolo Pass. So as you can see, the Sacramento River in the Sacramento Valley area of it hits a lot of different areas, passes a lot of different communities, different counties because of its size. And then from there, we move on to the lower river, still on the same watershed for the Sacramento River. And in this watershed, its major area is the Sacramento metropolitan area, and it connects to the American River on the right, and then it makes its way into this river. And then from the Sacramento River, it has very deep water, which was once used as a ship channel. And I'm not quite sure if it's still used, but it was used for transportation and for moving of some of that water. But more importantly, once it hits that area, it's going to meet the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta, which we actually have a presentation specifically about the Delta in later sessions of the Water Bootcamp. And then once it hits the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta, some of it is moved to the San Joaquin Valley or to Southern California. And the rest that is needed for the health of the Delta is discharged into the Pacific Ocean. Now, moving on into a different watershed, I'm going to move on to the California watershed, or one of the major California watersheds, which is the San Joaquin Valley watershed. And as I mentioned earlier, it's where the very top of where the water accumulates or snow, and then it makes its way down into its valley. So the San Joaquin River watershed kind of looks like an L, where it starts in the upper mountains and then it makes its way down north into the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta. And we're going to start with the very top at its watershed and then make our way down and follow it. So it first starts in the headwaters, which is in the Ansel Adams Wilderness, because that's where the majority of it accumulates, and then it connects to the Middle Fork, some of the Middle Forks and some of the other areas and small rivers, small creeks that connect to it. As you can see, they almost look like veins, but they're all connecting into the major area of the San Joaquin River. And then it makes its way all the way down into Millerton Lake, which is on the bottom left of your screen, or yeah, of the graphic. Once it hits Millerton Lake, it continues going down. And so Millerton Lake is there because of Bryant Dam. And so it holds some of that water, it stores it when it needs it, it moves it when it needs to be moved, but some of it continues down the San Joaquin River, and it makes its way down to the Mendota Pool. So where we see that kind of the L is now turning near the Fresno Slough and some of the other canals where it looks like there's a peak right there. That is near where Mendota Pool is, which is a waterway that connects the Delta Mendota Canal, the San Joaquin River, the Fresno Slough. So it's also a very important waterway that makes a lot of different connections so that we are able to move water to different ways, different areas. And so from there, the water turns and it moves, start going north up until the San Joaquin, Sacramento River delta. But on its way, it passes through the Fresno and Chowchilla rivers. As you see, there's a lot of tributaries that when they are full of water, they make their way onto the San Joaquin River. Some of these that make their water into the San Joaquin River are the Tuolumne River, the Stanislaus River. The Delta Mendota Canal isn't part of it, but as you can see, is just parallel to the river. And then some of the other ones are the Fresno and the Chowchilla River. When, like I said earlier, when they are full, they empty out into the San Joaquin River. As it makes its way north and it gets closer to the Sacramento River, it passes the Calorados River and the Mokelumne River, and then they all merge and connect in the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta. And that is where the San Joaquin River ends and the Sacramento connects, and they both connect and empty out there into the Delta. And so it has a long ways to go, all the way from the Ansel Adams until the Sacramento San Joaquin River Delta. And so now I'm going to move on. The Colorado River. The Colorado River goes from is a big part. Sorry, even though the Colorado River is adjacent to California, not in California, we also have a watershed for the Colorado River because some of its water makes its way into California. And so the Colorado River watershed is also a very large one. And as you can see from the graphic, it touches Colorado, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, as well as California. So all of these states are very dependent on that water. And so it drains into the basin or watershed of the river, which the river encompasses 246,000 square miles of the southern eastern North America. And then it makes its way into which is actually an international river as well, because some of its water makes its way to Mexico. There is a Colorado Compact, an agreement that between all of the states that are part of that use part of that water, that was created in 1922, was fully ratified in 1924, and then there's a lot of conversation still this day, especially because of just climate change and some of the vulnerabilities and lack of water that river is going through. And so it encompasses some of the upper basin. The upper basin of this watershed includes the Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. The lower one includes Arizona, Nevada, and California. And it was initially an allocated water basin for the region, but ultimately it allocated water within the basins of all of these states. And as I mentioned earlier, there's also an international agreement that was established in 1944, which is a treaty with Mexico, but it was revised in 2007 and 2017 to allocate water during some of the drought and surplus years, which is going to happen a lot more in the future. So just a little bit more about the Colorado Compact. The Colorado Compact, as I mentioned earlier, includes the state that are in the upper basin and then the lower basin. And it requires that the aggregate 10-year volume below Leaf Ferry does not fall below 75 million acre feet. So Lee's Ferry, as you can see on there, is about halfway through the river. And it should not go below 75 million acre feet. As I mentioned in an earlier session, an acre feet of water is about a football field that is high of 1 foot, and all of that water that you would fit into that is 1 acre feet. So this one should not go below 75 million acre feet, which gets even harder and harder as our droughts get more prolonged. Native water rights follow the agreements between the U.S. government and its tribes that are used today. And then the lower basin states allocations were agreed to in 1928 as part of the Boulder Canyon Project Act of Congress, which was authorized the building of Hoover Dam and created Lake Mead. But as I said earlier, some of that is being revised as we speak. And then we have just additional information, additional facts about the river. So it forms in the Grand Canyon, and that's where it starts. Its major dams include Hoover Dam, which creates Lake Mead that takes water to a lot of different areas, but specifically Las Vegas. It is downstream of the Grand Canyon, and it provides water for Arizona, California, and Nevada. Another notable dam on that river are the Glen Canyon Dam, which creates Lake Powell, and it's upstream of Lee Ferry. It's upstream of the Grand Canyon, and the majority of its water goes to Arizona. And then we have just the Colorado River and the Salton Sea and how they interact. So historical flows from the river were drained by accident actually into the Salton Sea because of some damage to some of the canals. And it overflowed so much that it breached into the Imperial Valley Canal from the river in 1905, and it created the lake as we know it today. The lake has sustained well, it has been sustained by tailwater from the Imperial Valley irrigation until 2014, and it's a major stopover of the Pacific Flyway. And it's and some of its projects are being considered, several projects are being considered today to restore the lake to what it once was because of its air quality issues, its recreational benefits, as well as being part of the Pacific Flyway. And now I have time for some questions, Victoria. I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, at this time, we will be addressing questions submitted via chat. It is not too late to submit your questions. Please add them to the chat function in YouTube. Okay, question 1. Have reservoirs or basins overflowed?
So in the past, not many have, but they can and have depending on the amount of water. There is a lot of safety nets that are provided in some of the building of the dams because dams are built for multiple reasons. One of those reasons is for flood control. And so because they're prepared and ready for flood control, it is important that they have those safety nets. So at times, yes, and when they do overflow, that's when we all have major problems in the downstream.
Okay, question 2. How is climate change expected to impact the hydrology of Sacramento, San Joaquin, and the Colorado River watersheds?
I'm sorry, can you tell me the question again?
Yes. How is climate change expected to impact the hydrology of the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and Colorado River watershed?
So climate change is impacting not just those specific watersheds that we mentioned, but all of the different watersheds. As I mentioned earlier in the hydrology presentation, some of that water comes, we are prepared for some of that water to come slowly and then move in different ways. But as it's become more and more water is coming because of watersheds. So climatologists are telling us that there's the same amount of water, the same amount of precipitation, but more in the form of water than the form of snow. Some of the dams that I mentioned that are specific to those areas were made for holding that water. And so now with the climate change and getting more in form of rain, versus no. It's being more and more of a concern and problems that we weren't quite ready for. So it's affecting our watersheds in different ways because of the difference in extremes from drought to flood.
Okay, and then we have a clarifying question. With the Colorado Compact, you mentioned that the aggregate year volume below leaf ferry should not fall below 75 million acre feet. For perspective, how much volume of water passes below Lee Ferry?
You know, I actually don't know that answer. Cordy, do you happen to know how much water passes through Lee's Ferry, just so that, for perspective, to know how much of that is the 75 million acre feet?
No, I do not know, but I would suspect that the long-term expected average flow at Lee's Ferry would be about the 75 million acre feet.
Thank you. So we'll make sure we have that answer for that, and we will make sure that we email that answer to everybody.
Okay, that was all the questions in the chat. If you have additional questions we did not address, please email us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us for this session. We hope it was informative. This session was recorded and will be available on YouTube until June 15th. Before we take a break, I would like to invite you to join the CWI listserv by following the link on the QR code to be the first to learn about CWI's projects. We will now be transitioning to a short break. Good morning and welcome to the Water Bootcamp brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. We hope you enjoyed the Fresno State Jazz Band while we got started. My name is Victoria Vera. I am a junior at Fresno State studying business, and I will be the moderator for these sessions. As I mentioned earlier, these virtual education sessions are brought to you by the California Water Institute at Fresno State. CWI is celebrating 25 years of working to integrate and coordinate Fresno State's interdisciplinary research and education water-related programs. We do this in collaboration with water stakeholders to facilitate the development and communication of research-based solutions to water challenges in California. The mission of the CWI is to connect academia to the water community to solve water management challenges through education and research. To achieve this, we engage with faculty and students in developing interdisciplinary research-based solutions to water challenges for a sustainable water future. In celebration of Water Awareness Month, CWI is hosting 3 water boot camps in English and 1 in Spanish this month. Earlier today, we covered what is CWI, hydrology, and watersheds. Now we are moving to stormwater. You can submit questions as we go on the YouTube chat feature. There is a slight delay between the presentations, so please ask your questions as they come to mind so we make sure the speakers are able to get them on time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. This session speaker is CWI's Assistant Director Cordy Qualley. Assistant Director Qualley has been working on water issues for over 40 years and was most recently a faculty in the Civil Engineering Department at Fresno State. And now to talk about stormwater, it is my pleasure to welcome Assistant Director Qualley to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Victoria, and it's good to be with you today. Thanks for being here, everyone, and we're hoping that this series is informative to you. Want to talk about stormwater and its impacts and how we live with it particularly in the San Joaquin Valley here. Going to be talking about it in the context of the Fresno area because it is easy for us to provide that. But when you think about the valley and its unique topography and the way we deal with stormwater here, pretty much what's going on in the Fresno metropolitan area is also happening throughout the state, at least in the San Joaquin Valley area. As we think about flood stormwater, we think about it as sort of that Beauty and the Beast contrast. Stormwater runoff, when it is uncontrolled and too much, creates flooding, which is devastating to economies, devastating to people's lives, and very destructive to property. But when we think about it in terms of a resource, particularly here in the valley, it provides us with a significant amount of groundwater recharge, which is important to both our domestic water supply and our agricultural water supply for the valley, and also for sustaining recreation and habitat in areas of the valley. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. It feeds both the riverine areas, corridors in terms of habitat and recreation, but also provides in terms of urban area, parks and recreation areas for people to enjoy. And then as a resource, it's important that we, as users, or basically if you want to call it consumers of stormwater, because we use it for recharge and for recreation, that we be aware that it's important resource that we need to protect from pollution. So we're going to talk about all of these aspects as we go through this presentation. Again, focusing on the Fresno metropolitan area because that's an easy area for us to think about in terms of where Fresno State is located and also the California Water Institute, but because it is a kind of prototype for a lot of drainage systems and way drainage is treated throughout the San Joaquin Valley. Um, particularly for those types of urban areas that do not have major rivers in which to discharge their stormwater runoff. And the fact that in terms of trying to protect those river bodies from pollution, we're trying to move away from direct discharge into rivers and streams anyway. The Fresno Metropolitan District, Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District has a service area of 400 square miles, and you can see the map here. Basically, it extends all the way up into the foothills from downtown Fresno up to Pine Ridge. So, and it encompasses all of the Big Dry Creek drainage area and Fancher Creek drainage areas. So these watersheds, as Laura had mentioned, are large and encompass a lot of runoff based all the way from the snow line down to the valley here. In order to protect the metropolitan area from runoff due to these foothill streams, primarily the Fancher Creek and Big Dry Creek and Little Dry Creek, the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District has sponsored and worked with the Corps of Engineers to construct 3 major reservoirs. The first one that was constructed is the Big Dry Creek Reservoir, which is located north of Shepherd Avenue, basically on the DeWolf Avenue alignment. And it was built in the 1950s to protect the metropolitan area from flooding due to Big Dry Creek. It's an extensive watershed that ranges all the way up to the Pine Ridge area and includes snow melt as well as rainfall runoff. The second one that was constructed was the Red Bank Creek Reservoirs, built in the 1960s, and it was constructed with money from the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District as a part of their management of foothill water, and it primarily controls runoff from the Red Bank Creek complex or watershed. The final reservoir that was constructed is the Fancher Creek Reservoir. It was built in the 1990s, late 1990s, and at that time also the Big Dry Creek Reservoir was raised so that it could control, hold back more water and have a higher degree of protection for the metropolitan area. These 3 reservoirs provide primary foothill drainage protection and are rated at the 100 to 200 year level of protection. The Fancher Creek Reservoir and the Big Dry Creek, the raising of the Big Dry Creek Reservoir were done under the auspices of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in cooperation with the Flood Control District, and they are now operated and maintained by the Flood Control District in cooperation with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Further downstream from these major reservoirs is another level of protection, which are called detention basins. And these detention basins are located on the major streams that flow through or flow into the metropolitan area. And what they do is basically take the high peaks that occur during a flood event and settle them out, basically reduce them and put that water into storage and then release that water at a lower rate that can be passed through the metropolitan area in the Fresno Irrigation District canal system that traverses through the metropolitan area from east to west. And we'll look at that in just a minute. These 5 detention basins starting from north to south, the Basin BY, which is on the one of the drainage areas in the north end of town, the alluvial drain detention basin, which is on the alluvial drain, Pup Creek, which connects to and detains the Pup Creek runoff, and then Red Bank Creek and Fancher Creek, which are both downstream facilities on those two creeks as well. So there is a fair amount of runoff that occurs between the major reservoirs and these detention basins. And also they are there, as I said, to kind of reduce that peak flow that's coming into the system a little bit more so that it can fit through the irrigation canals that pass through the metropolitan area. And we'll see that in just a minute. So here you can see the whole complex of rural watersheds that drain into the metropolitan area, the Big Dry Creek, Fancher Creek watersheds, and their tributary creeks are shown in the red-ish tone. The lower down creeks that drain into the metropolitan area downstream of those reservoirs are in the green. And are basically detained by either the Red Bank, Fancher Creek, Pup Creek, alluvial drain, and BY basins. And then those basins feed into the canals that pass through the metropolitan area. Primarily, that flood water from those detention basins ends up in either the Big Dry Creek Canal, the Enterprise Canal, or the Fresno Canal, Mill Ditch, Herndon Canal system. And I can trace that. This red line right here is the Fresno Canal, Mill Ditch, Herndon Canal system, which goes through the metropolitan area and out far west. It discharges into the San Joaquin River ultimately. The Enterprise Canal is basically along the outside border of the metropolitan area and picks up water there. And then the Big Dry Creek Canal, which comes down through from Big Dry Creek Reservoir down through Clovis and downtown, connects with the Herndon Canal here, but then also is another discharge point that goes out through the west to the west here. These canals are operated by the Fresno Irrigation District in cooperation with the operations of the Flood Control District's operation of the detention basins. So this is a complex dance that happens every 3 years out of 7, if you will, or 3 years out of 10, when there's excess water in these systems. And both of these agencies have developed an incredibly tight working relationship that allows them to manage this water safely as it moves through town. Finally, if you remember, Laura talked about watersheds. So you have, in our case, the Big Dry Creek watershed upstream of the metropolitan area, the Fancher Creek watershed, the Red Bank Creek watershed, and then a number of smaller creeks, watersheds that drain into the metropolitan area. But once you get into the urban area, urban areas have watersheds as well. And these watersheds are defined more by the topography and the improvements within the city. The Flood Control District, when it was first formed in the 1950s and late 50s, looked at all the options for how would we going to manage urban runoff and decided that self-contained drainage areas, aka urban watersheds, that were comprised of a collection system and a disposal basin or a stormwater basin, was the most practical and economical way for the metropolitan area to manage their stormwater. And these drainage areas or urban watersheds range from a couple of 100 acres to 600 acres. And that the maximum size is pretty much set by the cost of the collection system and the drainage basin that is required. And so in order to maintain the costs and keep them down to a reasonable level so that they can be afforded by the community, this seemed to be like the major breaking point for those sizes of watersheds. The smaller ones are pretty much set by the fact that they're in the highly urbanized areas and they require a smaller system to hold that, either maintain the basin or if they're in a pump system, because the pumps can only be so large, we need to keep them in a smaller area. One of the largest drainage areas, which is contrary to what I just said, is the downtown Fresno area, which basically is so large because in order to service that area and because of the existing infrastructure that was there from in the distant past, That system needed to have its storage basin way west of town out by Kearney and West Avenue. So that system collects a highly urbanized area with a lot of runoff. So that system is kind of large just because of the result of the topography and the need to capture that water that was already in through those existing systems. So here's just sort of breakdown. The service area of the Metropolitan Flood Control District is 400 acres, 400 square miles, I'm sorry. As I said, it extends from Pine Ridge up in this snow line all the way down to the metropolitan area and out west to Chateau Fresno in that area. There are 150 urban watershed collection basins, drainage area basins within the metropolitan area, and over 750 miles of pipeline systems. Most of this you don't see because it just is there, but you do notice the drainage basins around town, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we go through this presentation. As I mentioned, the Big Dry Creek Reservoir is located east of town and north of the city of Fresno Clovis. And it's a major flood control facility. It manages to direct water from Big Dry Creek. That's a major source of flooding for the area to contain it and then distribute that water both into Big Dry Creek for recharge purposes and also for to maintain flow through the city for irrigation purposes. But also when flows are quite high, those water is diverted out of diversion channel to the northwest out to Little Dry Creek, which then discharges into the San Joaquin River. And these operations at Big Dry Creek Reservoir, Fancher Creek Reservoir, and Red Bank Reservoir are all done through the flood control district and their personnel who are on trained and ready to take on these operations, but also in cooperation in conjunction with directions from the Army Corps of Engineers, which has primary flood control responsibility within the state of California, along with the Department of Water Resources. So most of you, if you have not lived in Fresno for a very long time or in the valley for a very long time, might not realize that the valley at one point in time was, pre-development back in the pre-1850s was basically a huge swamp during the spring runoff season. It, had its advantages. And as you know, during the summer, which is very hot, this was basically a very dry area, but for a few months in the spring, very wet. A number of notable flood events have happened in the Fresno metropolitan area and in other urbanized areas throughout the valley. Primarily in the Fresno area, those flooding events were in the 1930s that have been recorded, 1950, and then in 1969. And these pictures here are primarily for 1969. This flooding was the result of trying to move too much water through the Fresno Canal, Mill Ditch, Herndon Canal complex, and there was overtopping and washout of the bank, and it created a large amount of flooding in the metropolitan area, particularly south of McKinley Avenue. That flooding was a result of a huge AR, atmospheric river, that moved through the metropolitan area, had a phenomenal amount of rainfall that happened over about a 10-day period. Hasn't happened since. We've had some come close to it 3 or 4 times in the past, whatever it's been, 70 years, but haven't exceeded it yet. But as you know, Mother Nature can always exceed itself or herself. When you talk about stormwater, there are two distinct hydrologic environments that stormwater occurs in. One is that rural watersheds, which Laura had talked about a little bit earlier, which is on the left of this graphic, and you can see that in this case, a lot of the rainfall doesn't result in runoff. It results in infiltration and and both into shallow systems, which are fed and absorbed by the trees and vegetation. And then also some of it does end up as deep infiltration into the aquifer. And this is a good thing for us here in the valley because it provides us with groundwater recharge. The other side of that picture is the urban environment, where you see that because of the highly impermeable surfaces in the urban environment, roofs, driveways, roads, parking lots, etc., a large amount of that rainfall becomes runoff, and it can very quickly become a problem for in the urban area in terms of management. And so that's why we have collection systems, and we also have retention basins where that water is deposited. Very little of it ends up into the shallow infiltration and deep aquifer recharge. So what are we going to do with that water? Well, one of the solutions that we have is to, in terms of the Metropolitan Flood Control District's solution, is to put it into detention basins, or retention basins, I'm sorry, where the water is retained and then allowed to percolate and infiltrate into the groundwater. So what we are doing is trying to recapture as much of that urban runoff as we can and get it into the groundwater as a recharge. And here's a picture of a recharge basin, which I said stores water and then allows it to infiltrate into the groundwater table. You see these around Fresno and a lot of the valley towns. And they have other secondary benefits that we'll talk about in a minute, but really what we're talking about here is trying to find a safe place to store all that urban runoff, because it can't infiltrate or percolate and infiltrate. It's got to go someplace because of the imperviousness. We collect it with the urban stormwater pipeline system and deposit it in a safe location, which in this case is a stormwater basin. Some communities have access to river discharges, so they're doing that as well. The nice thing about a basin discharge system is that it makes it easier to manage the pollution in the stormwater. And part of the benefit of that is that the soils that are in the basin basically filter some of the pollutants out, and then through biological action in the soil, we end up seeing some of the other pollutants managed better through this type of system, as opposed to when it goes directly in the river. There's very little we can do to manage that pollution unless we can intercept it first. So, as I mentioned, one of the aspects of recharge of the basins that's important to the Fresno area and into the valley and as a whole is the ability to recharge that stormwater. You saw that a lot of the urban runoff doesn't end up infiltrating into the groundwater system. It ends up running off. And so if we can get it into a basin and store it, that's an important thing, because we can then allow it to percolate into or infiltrate into the groundwater. And that's important because, as you can see here, in the 1930s, the groundwater table in the Fresno and we'll see it in subsequent slide in Clovis was about 30 feet below ground level. It's now more like 130 feet. In other words, we've experienced about 100-foot drop in our groundwater table since in the last almost 100 years. And that's partly a function of the demand for water from the metropolitan area because of population increase. Most of the water in Fresno is derived from pumping groundwater. So our drinking water, the groundwater is our drinking water source, our domestic water source. That's true in Fresno and Clovis, although we are augmenting more of that with surface water. It's still a primary source of drinking water for us, for the community. And also it's a primary source of irrigation water for the agricultural industry that surrounds Fresno and in the valley, and is important to our economy. Here's a picture of what's going on in Clovis as well, and you can see that those high water tables have drastically reduced in the Clovis area as the population growth has increased, and so recharging a significant amounts of stormwater is an important aspect of our using that stormwater as a resource. Here's a picture of what the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District is able to do on an annual basis in terms of recharge. The green color depicts the amount of stormwater that they have recorded recharging into the groundwater table over the past 10 years or so. And the blue represents the surface water that they have also recharged. So in partnership with the Fresno Irrigation District and the cities of Clovis and Fresno, the Flood Control District uses their basins, some of their stormwater basins in the summer to hold surface water that has been allocated to the cities for recharge. And they, along with the cities of Clovis and Fresno, their active recharge, groundwater recharge sites. The Flood Control District also provides their basins so that these cities can use those basins for recharge activities as well. And you can see there's a significant amount of groundwater recharge that's going on in the metropolitan area as a result of this cooperative effort. Where does the water come from that goes into the recharge basins? Well, it's basically comes through the water that's stored behind the major reservoirs in the valley. And in our case, it would be Pine Flat Dam and the Millerton Dam, Millerton Lake and Pine Flat Lake. Behind those dams, picked up by the Fresno Irrigation District through their cooperative agreements and distributed through their irrigation system to both the cities' active recharge sites, but also to the flood control district's recharge basins or their stormwater basins that are acting as recharge basins. So you can see here, it's an extensive canal system that's available to the metropolitan area as a result of the development of the irrigation system by the Fresno Irrigation District. And again, a great cooperative effort among these agencies. One of the things we mentioned about in terms of stormwater basins is their ability to also provide habitat and recreation capabilities. So as you drive around Fresno and in other communities that have basins, you'll see that some of the basins are what we call active recreation basins, which have active use, primarily monitored by the city's recreation departments. Others are more passive in that they provide a green space for people in the community to walk their dogs, to go out and play a little soccer or hit some baseballs around, but isn't an active program there. And then some of them also provide, if they are in a recharge situation, they provide habitat for birds and for other aquatic life that can be sustained by these active basins, wet basins, if you will. This is a picture of Oso de Oro Park, which is also a flood control district basin, and it's been developed into a very nice recreation and habitat area that's in the community in Northwest Fresno. Not every basin looks like this, as you know, as you drive around town, but some of them are being developed in this, and they provide a nice amenity to those communities. I mentioned earlier that stormwater is a resource. Many people think of it as a nuisance, and for us who are in the stormwater industry, it is a resource that we want to husband and take care of. And so we want to talk a little bit about how you can be an active agent for preserving this resource. And one of those primary things that we want to do is keep as much pollution out of the stormwater as we possibly can. So the metropolitan area is again shown here. It is covered under an NPDES permit, which is a National Pollution Discharge and Elimination System permit, part of the Clean Water Act, that's a federal law. And this permitting requires that the metropolitan area basically police its sources of pollution through many activities, Some of them are active, such as making sure that sources of pollution are discovered and eliminated, and others are passives in terms of education of the community to make them aware of the impacts of their choices and their uses of pollution sources and how they can be an agent for protection of stormwater. It is an extensive permit. The Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District is the major permit holder, but they also have partners with the City of Fresno, City of Clovis, Fresno State, and the County of Fresno in the metropolitan area. And through this permit, they, as I said, carry out a number of activities. And some of you, if you are in a business and you have been on a special list of businesses that have potential to create pollution in stormwater, you probably also have a NPDES permit, and you are also have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which sets out certain things that you are doing to help protect stormwater from pollution. And we appreciate you and your efforts in that way. But each of us as people and citizens, we come in contact with stormwater all the time. We just don't even think about it much, but we have a responsibility to be a part of that protection plan as well. And there's a short video that we're going to look at just right now that's from the Flood Control District on pollution. Oops, maybe it's the next slide. But anyway, here are sources of pollution. The ones that are most prevalent that we have to deal with are the contact and runoff of pesticides, fertilizers, pet waste, and litter and debris. These are the primary ones. The rest of these here are all things to consider. The reason it's so important is because stormwater is one of the best solvents in nature. Water is a great solvent. Stormwater is highly neutral, so it is also a great solvent, and it both picks up and dissolves things very easily, but it also, through the process of erosion, picks up sediments and other things that are laying around on the ground. And so it, it's basically its own worst enemy in terms of its ability to be a transporter of pollution and an incorporator of pollution. I think maybe this next slide. So here's the yeah, sorry, I don't know if the sound is coming up, but basically it's showing you you wouldn't want to mix this stuff with your food, but in fact you are when it gets into stormwater, it gets into our groundwater, and from our groundwater comes our drinking water, and then oops, there you are. We've polluted our major source of drinking water. So what we're asking is that you become a change agent for yourself and for your community by being aware that your everyday activities can create or eliminate pollution from stormwater. And just sort of as another passing here is just a reminder that, even though we don't have a lot of active streams, we have a lot of active canals in the metropolitan area, and we can have nice, clean running water in these streams and canals, or we can have water that isn't very safe and isn't pleasant to look at or experience. So, you are a change agent. You are a person who has access to these sources of pollution, and the way you manage and use them is incredibly important, even though it may not seem like it. A little bit adds to a little bit, adds to a little bit, and then you have a lot. So when you're fertilizing your lawn, sweep up the excess fertilizer. Don't let it sit on the sidewalk. Get it off the sidewalk and get it back in the lawn where it belongs. Don't let oil and grease sit on your driveway. Clean it up so that it doesn't end up getting washed off into the storm drain. Those types of things, they're very easy to do, and important to the quality of our stormwater runoff. Just so you know, the Flood Control District and probably other areas, they manage their basins so that they don't allow the sources of pollution to build up in the soils. And as I mentioned, the soil sits there. It filters out some of the heavy metals that are in stormwater, and then as the soil also absorbs some of the other pollutants that are there, like oils and greases, etc. The flood control district, Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District, in their basins monitors the quality of that soil, and before it can become a hazardous waste in terms of any of those constituents, they scrape off on a timely basis a certain amount of that soil to a depth that allows them to remove the pollutants and the polluted soil, but it's not yet a hazardous waste. Deposit it safely, but also then renews that soil so it can start doing its filtration again. And that's just a standard practice for them over the years as they manage their basins. And now I'm done talking. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I actually respond to any questions that you may have.
Okay, ooh. At this time, we'll be addressing questions submitted via chat. It is not too late to submit your questions. Please add them to the chat function in YouTube. Okay. Okay, we have the first question. The depth to groundwater data stopped around 2015. Is there no more data? Is there no more recent data?
Um, there is more recent data, and I can't tell you exactly where it is at. I know that in some cases that decline in groundwater table has somewhat stabilized, primarily through legislation that's been passed by the state of California, but also through extensive recharge efforts that have been made. However, it's still on a slow decline, and if you would like to know what that information is, we can get that to you. The reason that stopped in 2015 is because these slides were provided by another partner of ours, and so we were just reusing that information as opposed to updating it. So there's your answer, as best I can give it.
Okay, question 2. How effective are stormwater basins in filtering out pollutants compared to other systems?
Okay, well, um, they are on a cost basis, highly effective on your sort of dollar per acre foot treatment. But if you want, but we're not talking about pristine water as it filtrates through the soil. It's still carrying some of those constituents with it, primarily those that are highly dissolved constituents. Um, so if you want to highly treat your water to, let's say, a drinking water standard or something like that, you're going to have to go to a highly expensive wastewater treatment process. And that's being done in the Southern California area where they actually treat their stormwater to drinking water standards or close to drinking water standards and then inject it back into the ground for groundwater recharge. In our case, what we're doing is, we've got 100 feet of soil between our bottom of, well, maybe not 100, but close to 100 feet of soil between the bottom of our basins and the groundwater table. And we're allowing that filtration and biological treatment to happen in that space so that I don't know exactly what the complete treatment capability is of that, but it is acceptable to the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board at this point as a treatment capability.
Okay, that was all the questions in the chat. There is actually one more. How do you convince our jurisprudents to develop a stormwater management plan if they do not have one?
Well, that's a great question. There are, the standard approach is education and then political pressure and finally, regulatory pressure. So education is sitting down with your authorities, the people who are on the boards of your jurisdiction, and convincing them that stormwater is a vital resource and we need to protect it. And the best way to do that is with known ways to do that. And there is an incredible amount of information out there on how to protect stormwater. And if you're looking for a good source, the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District can help you with that. Also, the Department of Water Resources has a great webpage on stormwater protection. The other thing is obviously through political action, which if you have enough people you can coalesce with, you can convince them that the voters are highly in favor of this. And finally, talking with your people in regulatory authority like the Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources Control Board. Sometimes they can bring some pressure through their ability to regulate these issues. The thing is that you have to realize that none of this comes cheap. It's not free. And so when you ask for this, you have to also be willing to pay for it. And a lot of times that's what the stumbling block is for jurisdictions to actually act, is their fear of incurring costs that they can't recover. So just be aware of that.
Okay, that was all the questions in the chat. If you have additional questions that we did not address, please email us. Thank you for joining us for this session. We hope it was informative. This session was recorded and will be available on YouTube until June 15th. Before we end the session, I would like to invite you to join the CWI listserv by following the link on the QR code. This will ensure you are the first to learn about CWI's project and events. Thank you again for joining us this morning. We hope to see you at future water bootcamp sessions.